Okay, I'm going to recording. Okay. Welcome everyone to this year's Torah Fund event, and hopefully more people will be joining us shortly. Judy, you're on.
Okay. I am bringing you greetings from the president of our North Atlantic region, whose name is Ilona Roll. She says, "Thank you for inviting me to your Torah Fund dessert. I am on Zoom for the Women's League of Conservative Judaism region president's monthly meeting, or I would be at your event. I wish I could clone myself. I am glad that your sisterhood can be biyachad, together, either virtual or in person. I want to thank your sisterhood here at BSBI for your support of Torah Fund and WLCJ, that's Women's League. Kol hakavod to all of you, and mazel tov on your accomplishments as a sisterhood, and again for your support of Torah Fund and WLCJ. Bishalom, Ilona Roll, MAR President." Okay. We also have here live and in Zoom person tonight with her dog Ruby.
As always.
Our region vice president for Torah Fund, Ellen Leonard, who's also going to say a few words of greeting. Ellen?
I bring greetings from Torah Fund, the Women's League charity dedicated to supporting the 5 conservative Masorti institutions of higher education. It's wonderful to see that so many of you believe in supporting our future rabbis, cantors, Jewish educators, and more. I'm sure that all the students who have benefited from your donations would thank you personally if they could. It's even more wonderful to be biyachad, together, at this Torah Fund dessert, and I look forward to hearing what Rabbi Hersh has to say. Toda rabah, and may you go from strength to strength. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Ellen. Sue?
Thank you. So just a brief bio, because I know we had it publicized in your email, but Rabbi Hersh is director of the Ramah Day Camp in Nyack, where he has worked since 2000. And just a PS, I attended Camp Ramah in Nyack, New York, as well as worked there as when I was a teenager. Rabbi Hersh is also part of the rabbinic team at the Orangetown Jewish Center. Ami, an alum of the Wexner Graduate Fellowship, was ordained at JTS in May 2012 and also received an MA in Jewish Education from the Davidson School of Jewish Education in 2013. A graduate of the University of Hartford, he holds degrees in elementary education and Judaic studies. Prior to entering rabbinical school, he taught at the Solomon Schechter of Greater Hartford. Originally from Providence, Rhode Island, he lives in Orangeburg, New York with his wife, Loni, and their 4 children, Micah, Zev, Noah, and Yael. So welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you.
We're very pleased to have you with us.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's an honor to be here, and really appreciate that you extended the invitation, and I'm excited to share with you, though I must say, both Judith and Ellen mentioned a dessert gathering tonight. I feel I'm a little cheated out of the dessert tonight, and if I'm standing between you and your Zoom screen and dessert, far be it for me for you to grab something to eat, but you'll owe me a dessert when we can not be in Zoom, but be in person. So first of all, I'd be remiss if we started our evening tonight without mentioning the fact that tonight brings in the States anyway, Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, which Israel's already been in the midst of for the past 7 or so hours, and a somber day clearly on the Jewish calendar, on the modern Jewish calendar, a day where we remember nationally our people, our young men and women who have given their lives to support and defend our country, but also a very personal day for, I imagine, some of us on the screen as well, where we remember not just names on a list of a nation, but personal names of friends or friends of friends. And it's with that thought and that note, and certainly the memory of those whose lives you remember today that I share remarks and share thoughts with you. It's also in the midst of the Omer, the counting between Passover and Shavuot, as we know. And I always love this time of year for a few reasons. One of them is that we really get to celebrate a holiday, not just for the 8 days of Passover and not just for the 2 days of Shavuot, but in some ways, a holiday that extends for the 50 days from experiencing Yetziat Mitzrayim, the leaving of Egypt and the freedom of becoming free people, to the experience of Revelation, where we receive the Torah. And over this 50-day period where we count each night, as you did in your minyan, I'm sure just before we came on, for those who were there, we count up to that experience of Revelation. And just as a side, before I start formally, one of my favorite stories, we count the Omer by saying, the night before was, and this night we will count the next night. And I had a non-Jewish friend a number of years ago, while I was in rabbinical school actually, who thought it was an exciting idea to count the nights of the Omer. And so sometime around July of that year, he called me up and said, Rabbi, I'm still counting. I'm up to night 78. And of course, we stopped counting the Omer at the 50th night. So we'd be 49th night, really, going into Shavuot. So if you're still counting, you're still in, good for you. As Sue shared in my bio, just briefly, to go through a little bit of who I am, so you know who you're speaking with tonight. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, a great Jewish community, a lovely space. Temple Emmanuel was and is a thriving conservative synagogue. And I felt very blessed to grow up there. My parents actually still live in the community. My sister moved back to town, and my brother-in-law, who's also a JTS ordained rabbi, took over as the senior rabbi at that synagogue where I grew up just a few years ago. So we visit regularly in Providence. But it was a community then, as it is now, rich with a really wonderful conservative Jewish day school, where we were enriched in our lives. And one of the unique aspects about Providence, at least in the Jewish community, is that basically where the Jewish community lives in Providence naturally is all around and in walking distance to the synagogue, the way that it used to be in a lot of small New England towns. So it was easy to walk to synagogue. In Providence, whether people are formally observant of Shabbat and won't drive or not, by the essence of where people live, they all are basically there. So I grew up with this really vibrant Shabbat community and a family that was committed Jewishly, enough to send 3 kids to a Jewish day school, enough to want us to be involved with the synagogue, but parents who owned a small retail business, wallpaper and paint and window treatments in Fall River, Massachusetts. So Friday nights were a business night in our house where my parents were still at the store till very late. And it took a long time for our family to come to a place of having Shabbat in our lives in a way that was central and core to who we were. And we attended Camp Ramah in New England as young campers. But when I reflect on my time in Providence, the reason I start there with my story is because what made the experience of growing up in Providence transformative to my life, beyond the experience of growing up in a vibrant community and a very warm and caring family, is the role models that I had in Providence. And Rabbi Alvin Confer, who was the longtime rabbi at the synagogue there, and his wife, Marcia Confer, who was the longtime Judaic studies principal at the synagogue, set me and so many others who grew up in that community on a path of wanting to pursue this work professionally and personally in our lives. And I think if we all look back in our own lives, probably, it may have been a long time ago, but we can think about who those people were who were role models for us, people who inspired us, people who wanted us to be the best versions of who we were and encouraged and pushed us in just the right way to help us along this path. It may have been in childhood, it may have been in adulthood, it may have been at a much later point in life. My bet is that we'd be able to reflect on who those people were. And I'm sure in your community, you certainly have those opportunities as well. From growing up in Providence, I went to, as you mentioned, to University of Hartford, not far from where you were. I think we even went to restaurants in Manchester, if I recall correctly, or the shopping centers there. But my wife and I actually met as freshmen at the University of Hartford and loved our experience in West Hartford. Always thought actually we'd end up there as adults with a family just because we loved the community so much. And I studied elementary education and Judaic studies at the Greenberg Center at the University of Hartford, for those who are familiar. And there too had tremendous mentors who allowed me academically and socially to continue to grow. I was very involved in the life of the campus. I served at certain points as the president of the student body of the university and also the president of the Hillel. And Hillel and the student government were the key components of my life, perhaps even more than the academics, though I did love my academics. And they were opportunities that allowed me to try out ideas and test out what it meant to be a leader, what it meant to be somebody involved and connected in the world. And perhaps most important for this community, my early career right after graduating with a degree in elementary education, as Sue mentioned, was at the Solomon Schechter School in West Hartford, learning from the one and only principal, Carl Mandel, who I believe is a member of your community. Carl was my first boss. His daughter, Michelle, was my first girlfriend in camp when we were 12 years old. And Carl taught me a lot in my first couple of years of working. A lot of good things to do and definitely how to get in trouble, as I recall. If you watched Carl, you learned how to cause good trouble. And if I'm guessing correctly, he's probably still causing good trouble somewhere out there in the world. So if I say something smart tonight, you can credit Carl. And if I say something that I regret saying, you can also credit Carl when you see him. But we stayed in West Hartford for a couple of years while I was teaching. My wife is a physical therapist, and she worked at Connecticut Children's Hospital for a couple of years early in our marriage as well. And then in 2006, we moved to New York City. I entered rabbinical school at JTS, and we spent 6 years while I was in school, 5 of them in New York City, and 1 of them in Israel, in Jerusalem, studying to become a rabbi. And I'll come back to my JTS years in a moment, but just to give you, so those were really formative years in my life, in our early life as a couple, as a young family. We had children, our first 2 while I was in rabbinical school, and the learning and the growth that I experienced there continue to carry me through my career, certainly at this point. I was ordained in 2012 and then started working full-time for Camp Ramah, for the Ramah Day Camp in Nyack. Nyack, New York is in Rockland County, just about 30 minutes northwest of Manhattan, just to give you an idea, across the Hudson River from Westchester. And soon afterwards, I started also working, in addition to the full-time job at Ramah, very part-time as one of the rabbis at the Orangetown Jewish Center, another community with a very strong and proud Torah Fund community and a vibrant synagogue. And that's where I remain. My wife and I have 4 children now. Micah, who, as Sue mentioned, is 12, will become bar mitzvah this fall. Zev, who is in 4th grade, and twin girls, Noah and Yael, who are in 1st grade. And when I have the chance to speak about my work and the training that I received at JTS, I always start off with the most basic principle, which is I feel truly like I have the best jobs in the world, and I feel blessed to do the work that I do. It's not easy work always, and that's what makes it perhaps really interesting work, but it's really a blessing to do this work. So when I was at JTS, and I was there for, I mentioned the 6 years I was there, you should all know that the impact that you have through the Torah Fund was felt by students absolutely, and that continues until today. For one reason, perhaps, and one reason that stands above the rest, we pray every single day at the seminary in the Women's League Seminary Synagogue. And all around it are reminders of the work of the Women's League and the Torah Fund to help support the institution that we are lucky enough to be a part of. And if the library is the academic head of an institution, the Women's League Seminary Synagogue, certainly at the Jewish Theological Seminary, is the heart of that institution. It's a place where we gathered each morning and each afternoon for our prayer time. It's a place where people learned how to live and lead the rhythms of Jewish life. And it is a beautiful, beautiful space that I imagine most of you, if not all of you, have been to and seen. And if you haven't, you should plan a field trip. It was just recently refurbished. It looks stunning, and is not only a heart because of the prayer, but it's a place physically located more or less in the middle of the building. And it's a place that in the hubbub of academics and study and learning, one can always go to sit and to reflect and to be within their own thoughts. And I can tell you for sure that as a student, I used that synagogue space for all of those reasons. It was a core of who I was, and it was a special home away from home, if you will, to be able to reflect. But of course, as a student, I knew, and I think students still know, that the work that you all do to help support the seminary, and for groups like you from all over the country, and for that matter, all over the world, that support the institutions of conservative movement learning, not just in New York City, but all over, couldn't be possible without your supports. And every little small bit from every small community adds up, whether that's through scholarship support to allow students to work and come to school without graduating with tremendous debt, or beautifying spaces around the building, or helping with the holiday celebrations. It's support of people like you who really helped and allowed, when I was studying to become a rabbi, and many, many, many other rabbis for the generations now, to be who we are and to do what we needed to do during our formative learning years, because of the fundraising and the support you so provided. So thank you, first of all. And I have dear friends who show off their pins every year, so I won't ask you to show off your pins, but I hope they're nice. And there we go, I see Ellen's pin already there. So I'll share a few anecdotes of my time when I was at the seminary. I was there during a couple of interesting points of transition for the movement. The first is that during my 6 years in school, I saw the beginning of a tenure of a new chancellor, Chancellor Arnie Eisen, who just stepped down about a year ago, and also a tenure of a new rabbinical school dean who also just stepped down about a year ago, Rabbi Danny Nevins. And I was there from there with both of their predecessors, and then when they were there in their beginning years as well. I was also there as the conversation continued and eventually came to a head of the admission of gay and lesbian rabbinical and cantorial students into our movement. And I remember vividly the conversations that were not just academic or theoretical, but they were practical. As I sat and studied next to a young man who was openly gay and very much wanted to become ordained. And that was during the time that I was at school. And those transitional moments of leadership and transitional moments in our movement certainly had an impact on who I am as a rabbi and who I am as an individual. But when I really think about my time at JTS, it's less about the institutional aspects of it. It's more about the personal. What did I learn and who did I learn with are really the topics that I think about often. So of course, any normative rabbinical training program is going to be full of the things people think rabbis learn about: Talmud and rabbinics and Torah study, all of those types of things that Rabbi Koningsberg and so many rabbis you've encountered, I'm sure, teach all the time in their synagogues. And I loved those classes. To be able to have the blessing of sitting and learning how to learn over a 6-year period was fantastic. But when I think about my favorite classes, my classes that really stuck out for me as a learner, and for each it's a different role, maybe it wasn't those traditional classes. In fact, it wasn't. But I'll give you 3 different things that I think really stick out in my memory. The first is that I had an opportunity to take a theology class with a great theologian of our recent times who's since passed away, Rabbi Neil Gilman, Zichrono Livracha. Rabbi Neil Gilman was the leading theologian of the movement for many, many decades. And to sit with him towards the end of his career, not only in class, but as his research assistant, I felt like I was sitting at the foot of, like a real chacham, a real wise person who was there to help me understand and make sense of the world. And that was true of the theoretical, but also the practical. All sorts of different questions. What does it mean to become a parent? As I became a parent for the first time as a rabbi, a rabbinical student. What does it mean to deal with death for the first time? What does it mean as a rabbinical student to have an internship where you go to say the vidui prayer, the prayer that you say when somebody is about to die? And as a student with very little experience, that person dies while you're in the room with them. And how do you possibly process that as any individual human being in the world, but specifically as a future faith leader? So my time in Rabbi Gilman's classes really shaped who I am a bit. And then I think also about 2 classes having to do with language. The first was a class about the work of the Masorites. The Masorites were scribes, people around the turn of the millennia, who were the people responsible, as you may have learned or heard elsewhere, for writing down the musical notes, the cantillation, the trope marks that we use for the Torah today, or the vocalization, the vowels that were put into our system, and many other scribal aspects of their work. And I had the chance to sit around the table with a tremendous scholar, Professor David Marcus, who is still teaching at the seminary today, with a small group of students to dissect a piece of text and understand what it meant, not just from the words, but what could you learn from the symbols and the punctuation and the grammar. And it may sound a little dorky or a little academic-y to think about vowels and punctuation or grammar being exciting. But the truth is, you can find meaning out of it. You can find meaning for our modern day of how we relate to the text. And that to me was an incredibly exciting class. And I'll share one other class. There was a requirement while we were in school to take a class of modern Hebrew literature. Almost every course being offered was a class in modern Hebrew poetry. Now, I must admit, and forgive me for poetry lovers out there, I am not a poetry lover. So I was pretty, let's just say I was not excited to take a modern Hebrew poetry class. But instead, just by chance, one semester, I found a class that fit the requirement of fit the bill of the requirement about modern Hebrew language. And it was a class about the history and redevelopment of the Hebrew language from the time of Eliezer ben Yehuda, who is credited as the grandfather of the father of the modern Hebrew language, and what it has looked like as the language over the past 100 years or so has developed from the very beginning, where it basically was a non-conversational language, to Eliezer ben Yehuda needing to create language and words with his family to know what it meant. And for example, he took words from our religious tradition. So they saw an elevator. An elevator goes up and down, but there was no word in the rabbinic tradition for elevator. But for Rosh Chodesh, when we celebrate a new month, as we just have done, we add the prayer Yael v'yavo. You should go up and you should come in our prayers. So when they first called something an elevator, they called it a Yael v'yavo, an up and a going down, because that's what it figuratively did. And that type of class, for me, still continues to be something that I draw upon many years, a decade after ordination, to think about things that I can teach, to think about things that inspire me, and to think about things that I want to continue to share with others and learn more about myself. So the truth is, even though 6 years is a long time, there's a lot of learning that could take place there. More than teaching me specific content or information, what I think JTS does so well is they train us to become people who know how to access our own learning. Meaning, no matter how many years I spent in rabbinic training, and this is true of any rabbi, we could never possibly learn everything we need to know for an entire career or an entire lifetime. But better, they inspired us to know how to learn and know what to access and know what resources to go to, and really to teach us to spend a lifetime becoming what we call in Hebrew a Yodea Sefer, someone who really understands books, someone who really understands how to access that knowledge. It may be someone today who understands how to access knowledge on a computer screen or on a website in addition to the books, but the books and that learning are key and central, I think, to our rabbinic career. And I know that I think I speak for every rabbinic colleague I've ever encountered. It's not just about the learning that we did while we were in school. Of course, you keep learning and you keep getting inspired. And some of that learning happens on your own, and some of it happens by engaging with congregants or colleagues in whatever organization we're a part of. But the other key part to my rabbinic training time had to do with friendships. And I believe in a concept that a modern thinker has called relational Judaism, you may have heard of. The idea that we learn through Judaism, not just by learning text or tradition, but that we learn Judaism and experience Judaism through the relationships we build. So as much as my relationships with my professors were very key to my time at the seminary, equally were my friendships and relationships with my peers, people who have now gone off and are rabbis all over the country and all over the world, who I had the chance not only to learn with and from, but to experience life together, to celebrate Shabbat and holidays together as a group of future rabbis, to learn what that meant to be together in community while being with each other, to celebrate with each other, and of course, to experience the losses that inevitably come when you're living in a community. And those friendships and those relationships still, to this day, carry me all the time. I text and email and call these rabbinic colleagues as amongst my dearest friends. Just Thursday night, I'm going into the city to meet a few friends who are visiting from out of town who are working in synagogues all over the country to have a bit of a reunion Thursday night in New York City. Not easy for rabbis to get together because they're often busy on weekends, but really have taken time to be together and maintain those relationships as well. After I was ordained in 2012, I knew pretty early on, even before rabbinical school, that I thought I wanted to. There's Carl Mandel. I gave Carl a shout out at the beginning. Carl, it's good to see you. I told him anything smart I say is because of you, and anything bad I say is also because of you.
Well, that's very accurate.
It's good to see you, Carl.
Same here. The other friendly faces as well.
Great. So
He was a bomb. He was a bomb when I knew him. No, he was always wonderful.
I will tell you all that I vividly remember walking into Carl's office when I was accepted to rabbinical school. I had been on lunch duty in the cafeteria as a young teacher, and I received the call from the seminary that I had been accepted. And I told Carl that I had good news and I had bad news. And the good news was that I was going to rabbinical school, and the bad news was that he needed to find a new teacher. So after that ordination that I was just sharing about, I knew that I wanted to go into education work. I knew that I wanted to probably go into informal education, though I loved the training that I had as a formal classroom teacher. And I was always inspired by Jewish camp, perhaps because I get to wear shorts and t-shirt most of the year still, but I think it's a place and a medium where we get to teach by living naturally, meaning we are not worried about a particular curriculum, though we do have a curriculum, and we're not worried about the ins and outs of every single day life and stresses. But in camp, we get to teach by living Jewishly, and we live Jewishly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the summer months. And we get the chance to inspire and work with young adults. And the camp that I ended up working at, Ramah Day Camp in Nyack, where I still am today, 10 years later, as the director, is a camp that I started working at while I was in college as a young counselor. And it's a unique model for those who are not aware. Sue knows because she worked there, but there are about 800 campers in our setting. And they come from all over the metropolitan New York area at a day camp, from entering pre-K to entering 8th grade, so 3 and 4-year-olds up to 14-year-olds. And we run a tremendous day camp program full of swimming and Jewish learning and arts and sports and anything you could imagine in a summer camp, we take care of and we handle. And then at 4 o'clock, unique to our camp, the staff members stay in camp. And we run a residential program for about 250 young adults, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds who spend their summer with us as our staff, who are there not only to help the campers during the day, but to experience an opportunity for their own growth and their own learning and their own leadership development and their own intermingling of who the other young adults are in the community. So each night from 4 o'clock in the afternoon when our campers leave until much later in the night than I probably would like to admit, our staff members are engaging in conversation and learning with each other. And I truly believe that the next generation of Jewish leaders and of leaders of the world in general are spending their summers in our camp, becoming inspired by each other. Not only is that American staff members, and we have about 200 of those, but we have about 70 Israeli staff members. We actually bring the largest delegation of Israeli staff members to any camp in North America come to our camp in Nyack, New York. And that's not by accident, because Camp Ramah, not only in our location, but in the 12 overnight camps and 5-day camps that we have across the country, have believed since day one, in that first summer in 1947, the year before Israel was founded, that Israel needed to be core to who we were as a camping movement and what we taught to people. It's teaching people not just land and not just geography and not just culture, those things are important, but it's teaching people about relationships. So each year since 1947, the Ramah camps have brought shlichim to camps. And I'll tell you a story. One year, as lore goes, the Israeli staff did not arrive on time. And that year was 1967. I don't need to explain to this crowd what Michelle, were you at camp in 1967 in Wisconsin?
I wasn't in Wisconsin. I was in Glen Spey, New York. It was my first Ramah experience ever, the first time I ever met Israelis. And that Ramah summer was the most impactful, spiritual, ruach-filled experience of my entire life. 1967, when those Mishlachat arrived.
Yeah, so those Israelis came late that summer to a lot of our Ramah camps, and certainly in Wisconsin, as the story goes, they arrived late one night off the plains. Imagine flying in from the battlefields of Israel after the victory of the Six-Day War to need to land, I guess, maybe somewhere in Chicago or somewhere else, and you need to take like an 8-hour train ride or a trip ride to the middle of Conover, Wisconsin. And late at night, the Israeli staff arrived at camp and were greeted by all of the staff who knew they were arriving, applauding, because they arrived late because they had just gotten off the battlefields of the Six-Day War. But Israelis and Americans in all of our camps and in the camp that I direct are a crucial aspect. I need our staff to celebrate with each other and celebrate life with each other. So when I go back to Israel in just a couple of weeks, my third trip since this calendar year started, it'll be for a wedding of one of our Israeli staff members to one of our American staff members. And it's one of the zechuts, one of the privileges of doing the work that I do. So Ramah has played a central role in my life. Of course, I spend time not only teaching and being a rabbi, but I do those things in our camp. But I do the things you would think of when you run an organization. I fundraise and I deal with budgets and numbers and administrative work and managing a team and mentoring and working with governance, with boards and lay leadership and all of those types of things. And in many ways, that training happened at JTS. It's not maybe the focus of a lot of what we do, but I really believe that the work I do, every aspect of it is Jewish education. When I'm doing recruitment for campers, for example, and trying to convince families to send their children to camp, I'm not a salesman. I'm a Jewish educator who is helping a family along a path of a Jewish journey for that family. Because starting a young child in a day camp at 4 or 5 years old might mean that a family who's not yet connected with a synagogue is going to someday join your synagogue because their children are the ones who are inspiring them. And when I need to fire a young adult counselor, which happens occasionally when there are troublemakers like Carl around who are young counselors, and they need to be let go, I think about it as a learning experience, not from an HR perspective, but a learning experience where perhaps a year later, we can have a meeting and they can engage in tshuva, in repentance for what they did wrong, and be welcomed back to the staff the very next summer. And I think that's true of all the aspects of what I do. When I fundraise and ask people to support the work we do, it's not just doing it as a professional fundraiser. It's doing it because we believe in our mission of Jewish education. We believe in our mission of supporting young children and young adults along their Jewish journey. So that work that I do, I feel very blessed to do. My mother still wants to know what I do 10 months of the year, but I tell her that I'm pretty busy most of the time. And that's true of anyone in the camping profession. And in addition to the work that I do at Ramah, during my rabbinical school time, did an internship at a lovely synagogue called the Orangetown Jewish Center, as I mentioned, in Rockland County. And since that time, I've remained very close with the 2 full-time rabbis at the synagogue and came on as part of what we call the rabbinic team at our synagogue. I'm there to support them, to help them in their work when there's overflow or extra work that needs to be done, to engage in some adult education or family programming. But really, it's a place where I live with my family and I get to supplement the work that I do at Ramah, which sometimes during the year can feel a little bit administrative heavy, with some real relationships and teaching during the year at the synagogue as well. So all of that to say, I think I have the best jobs in the world. I love what I do. I'm inspired by what I do, and I feel blessed to be able to do the work. I started by saying it's not so easy. It's not so easy. It's really, really not so easy. Rabbi Gordon Tucker, who was a longtime congregational rabbi, once told rabbinical students, probably told rabbinical students for many years actually, that if you're going to be a rabbi, you have to love Jews, all types of Jews. And you know what? I think that's true. I think that's true of anyone engaging in Jewish community. We know the challenges we can bring as individuals. We know the challenges we can bring as communities, and we know the blessings we can bring also. So if the work was not challenging, or for that matter, the work was not exciting, I don't think I'd want to do this work. When I speak with friends or colleagues who are not in the rabbinic world, or for that matter, are in the rabbinic worlds, and they don't love what they do, I sometimes wonder what that must feel like, because I truly love what I do. And I can't imagine pouring my heart into the work that I do without loving it. So it is challenging, and challenge is what makes it exciting. And as I've promised my wife, who I don't think ever thought she'd be married to a rabbi. In fact, I can guarantee that she never thought she'd be married to a rabbi. If I stopped loving the work, or if I stopped feeling that I was continuing to grow and to learn, then I would stop doing it and I'd find something else to do. And I think that's an important piece to remember about rabbis these days and rabbinical students at the seminary. It used to be that the track that the Jewish Theological Seminary wanted their rabbinical students to go to, the pinnacle job, was in academia. The congregational rabbinate was looked down upon for many decades of JTS rabbinical training. Only in the 60s and 70s and maybe 80s or even later was it thought, oh, we should probably train rabbis to be practitioners in the fields. And then it became, you wanted to go into a pulpit. You wanted to be able to do work in a congregation. And that's still the path forward for most rabbis out of school. But there's also a growing trend that the rabbinic work can take on a variety of meanings. So the fact that I get to be a camp director, or that colleagues and friends are working in Jewish organizations or as hospital chaplains, or a couple of my rabbinical school classmates in the armed forces as Army and Navy chaplains, or running Jewish organizations, or working at Hillels, or teaching in day schools, or being heads of day schools. Those are all not only options for an individual coming out of school, but what I think is exciting about the role, and this has continued to change for the rabbinate, is that you don't need to do one thing for your entire career. You can move actual physical jobs in actual physical locations. You can move between fields within the field of Jewish education, and there are good, meaningful jobs with good, meaningful work to do. Sue asked if I would talk at one point about the future, the potential opportunities for future rabbis and for the Jewish world. And I guess I'll just end with this piece before I open up for questions, I guess, or comments or jeers, if depending on how you thought of what I said. I think the future is bright for Jewish community. I think there are challenges ahead. I think there are challenges ahead for our conservative movement. There's no doubt about that. But the core of who we are is central and is strong. It may be a smaller core than it was 30 years ago, but that's okay. The organizations and the institutions in this world, Jewish or otherwise, that are thriving are the places that feel good and strong in who they are and believe what they believe in, and are not afraid to speak out about that and don't shy away from what they hold dear. And I think JTS and our conservative movement, and certainly the Ramah camps, continue to do that in very, very, very important ways. And we will continue shouting our message from the rooftops. My brother is a political scientist. He studies elections and voter turnout. And what he explains to me is that the trajectory and the growth of the conservative movement in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when suburban movement was happening and all those types of things, were directly aligned with centrist politics in this country. And far be it for me to get into politics tonight of all nights. But what he also explains is that as the movements have kind of gone like this to polar opposites, that liberal life and extremism is happening in religious life is paralleled in the political sphere as well. And all of these things are cyclical. They will continue to ebb and flow and move in directions as well in the parallels of religious life and communal life in civic society as well. So I think our future is bright. And if someone asked me if they thought it was a good career to be a rabbi, I would say it's the great career. Know what you're getting into and have a lot of fun with it. And I want to conclude my piece here just by sharing a bracha, a blessing that we read in the Talmud that is supposed to be stated in the last days of the month of Nisan. We're just past that. We just had Rosh Chodesh, but I'm going to use some rabbinic prerogative here to say we can use it for a last day or two, even though we're in the new month. And the bracha is supposed to be said when you are in this time of year, when you see a tree blossoming, not just a tree blossoming in general, but specifically this time of year. And here's the bracha. It's a bracha I wish to all of you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shelo chisar be'olamo, kulum uvara vo briot tovot, vilanot tovot, lehanot bahem b'nei adam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has made nothing lacking in this world and created it in goodly creatures and goodly trees to give mankind pleasure. So as we are in this counting up to Revelation, I ask all of you, take time to look out at those trees. Take time to literally smell those roses and flowers and feel blessed for the world we live in. The work you are doing to help support future rabbis is important. The work you are doing to create goodness in the world is important. And those trees around us are physical reminders of God's goodness in this world that we should never forget or take for granted either. So thank you, everyone.
Amen.
Very good.
That was grand. I love that. Everything that you said, your presentation, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to make a comment.
Uh-oh.
Now, Ami was a talented teacher, but his greatest strength was his relationship with the students. So it was very easy for me to see him in this kind of a role and knew that it would be extremely successful because these young and growing youth need people who can relate to them on their levels. And kudos, and I wish you continued good luck and success. And
Thank
hi
you.
your wife.
I will, and same to you. You should also know that there was only a 2-year period in my entire life that I went by Mr. Hersh, because soon afterwards it became Rabbi Hersh or Ami. But my 2 years of teaching, Mr. Hersh, there's still a population in this world of about 40 students who every once in a while I run into somewhere in Jerusalem or in New York, and I hear somewhere from the background, Mr. Hersh, Mr. Hersh. And I know it's one of those young adults who now are college graduates themselves.
So would anyone like to ask Rabbi Ami Hersh any questions at this time or comments? Judy?
I'm just curious why you picked elementary education. Did you like do work or relate to kids when you were a teenager or youngster? How did you get into that aspect?
Yeah, to some degree, I was always involved with kids, whether that was helping in the synagogue where I grew up to, engage with the younger children. I'm the oldest of three children, so I had younger siblings and many, many cousins around. So to some degree, I think I always had some experience and interest in that. I think that somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that I wanted to go into Jewish education, maybe the rabbinate, but I knew I wanted to go into Jewish education. And truthfully, it was a practical decision. For some reason, as an 18-year-old, I knew that I wanted to study Jewish studies, but it was not a useful degree to graduate college with. And I wanted to have a degree where I could have a job that was really practical and useful right to start with. So I studied both in college and gained the best of both experiences.
Any other questions?
I only had personal questions I posted in the chat.
Oh, what did you write, Michelle? I'm sorry.
I wanted to know
Oh,
in how
yes.
many places did you cross paths with him?
So with the Shira also and with Hillel, we definitely crossed paths a lot. Hillel was, we were all in school together, and Rabbi Koningsberg, I believe, also sat in on a class or two when we were in school together. And
Right.
but Hillel was an intern at the synagogue, the Orangetown Jewish Center, where I do some of my rabbinic work as well. So we
Right.
crossed paths for a year then as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought so.
Did he take over your position with Gilman after you left it?
That's a good question. Did he hold that role of research assistant afterwards?
Yeah,
So
he
then-
did. He
I don't
was
know if it was a
doing work
direct
with.
transition or not, but he definitely, that's great. He must have.
Yeah, he
had
was
an
doing
entire-
that. I think he was doing it right before Neil passed.
Wow. What a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Did you know Eitan? One that never went to rabbinical school.
We must have connected paths somewhere, but I don't recall exactly where.
Okay.
Okay, I have one more question, which will be boring to everybody. So Dan Lieben, he was like at your shul, right, when you were growing up?
So Rabbi Dan Lieben, yeah, was the assistant rabbi at the very beginning of his career when I was a young child in Providence. And
Okay.
his kids are roughly all my age, and we grew up together until he moved on to a synagogue in
Natick,
Massachusetts,
yeah.
where he just retired from. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, just curious.
Yeah.
Lots of overlaps. That's why
Yes.
I really enjoyed your presentation. You have a wonderful, just wonderful character. And I think that the Ramah movement is very blessed to have you in it, and the way that you know what you have to offer for the people that will cross your paths. So I just wanted to say that I'm
Thank you.
I'm very pleased.
Thank you. I think I saw another hand up. Yes.
I wondered how you deal with anti-Semitism with the children that you come among, especially the older ones, the people that are counselors.
Yeah, it's such an important question. And I think the way that you added that piece on, particularly of the older counselors, let me first address young children. You know, there's no doubt that we're seeing a rise of anti-Semitism in our world. I'll be honest, as a child growing up in New England and going to school in Connecticut, I learned about anti-Semitism and I knew it was out there in the world, but it never felt personal. It was never something that I faced, quite honestly, as an individual. But I know that's not really true any longer on college campuses. And I know that's not true any longer, unfortunately, in the world that we see things so differently than we did even 5 or 10 years ago. With young children, I really believe the approach is teaching to love Judaism and be proud of who they are as human beings in the world and as Jews in the world. It's not my job, I don't believe, to teach young children how to combat the evils of the world, just like it wouldn't be true for me to teach them how to deal with the most complex or difficult issues in their lives. My job as an educator is teach them to love and to have that love so that when they come back to a Judaism that may not be as peaceful and loving when they are older, that they have a desire to retain and to stay connected. For young adults, though, for adults I work with on our staff during the summer, it's very much a topic. It's very much a topic of conversation. And I believe it starts with a few different ways. Similar to with kids, it's making sure they're proud of who they are and feeling good and connected with people so they know who they can talk to about their Jewish questions and their Jewish life. And they know who they can seek out when they have troubles or challenges in their communities or on their college campuses. It's educating them. It's giving them the knowledge to know what is true, and for that matter, to know what is not true, and to make sure they are knowledgeable Jews about their Judaism, about their Jewish history, about their understanding of Israel with all of its bumps and bruises, but a love for Israel is central, I believe, to this topic. And it's connecting them with a whole variety of organizations and experiences that make them proud of who they are and know that it is okay to be proud. My approach is not through teaching necessarily how to combat anti-Semitism. There are people who do that in the world, and it's good, important work. And I'm not saying they shouldn't experience it. It's just not my role in the world. It's not my approach in the world. Our job is to teach love, to teach engagement, and to teach knowledge so that when they go out in the world and they do encounter it, they know who they are and they're proud of who they are, and they know who they can turn to if they need more support.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions?
This is another Jewish geography question. We used to have a Chazan here, Wayne Krieger, who came from Rhode Island and who also went to University of Hartford, but a long time ago. And I don't know if you crossed paths with him, and his daughter Kochava also went to University of Hartford.
So not his daughter Kochava, but his daughter Yael, who's his older daughter. And
Oh, right.
Carl's daughter Michelle and I were all friends growing up in Ramah and in the USY worlds. And Wayne's parents, of blessed memory, Seymour Krieger, was like the stalwart Jewish educator and social worker of the Rhode Island Jewish community. So I grew up spending Shabbat meals at Wayne's parents' house well after Wayne has gone from the house, but definitely know the family.
Yeah, they used to come to our shul quite a lot when he was chazan, so we knew the whole family.
Lovely, lovely. It really is a small interconnected Jewish world.
Absolutely. So anyone can still jump in, but I wanted to say that, Rabbi, I mentioned Rabbi Thaler and Bramnick to you, who were directors at the day camp, and they would be extremely proud of you
Thank you.
because they were extremely effective. And as Michelle said, Ramah is so lucky to have you because I remember them to be extremely effective, even as a young camper going there and working there. And I feel the same about you. I'm sure everyone loves you. And I'm sure you're making a difference in many, many lives.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your invitation to come speak tonight. And again, your support of the seminary and your support of your local community are so crucial to the work that I do in Jewish education, the work we do as rabbis, and the work we do to train future rabbis. And I just want to extend that appreciation once again, and also give you all an open invitation, which is that if you want to be inspired and you want a chance to see things, first of all, of course, go visit JTS and see students in action, sit in on a class, sit in the brand new spaces that are stunning. My office, I should have mentioned, for Ramah is still in the seminary building. So I'm there virtually every day, except for the summer months. And it's a stunning new space that's been really refurbished, redesigned with a modern sensibility. But the open invitation is to come visit us at camp. And Ramah Nyack is not so far from Manchester. And if over the summer you want to come visit on a day, you have my information or Sue has my information, it's an open invitation. We'd be thrilled to show you around. And I'll give you the highlight, which is that each morning when the campers or staff arrive, it's about 1,000 people. We start off every morning for 15 minutes with what I like to call high intensity Israeli dancing. And it is modern hip hop, pop style music from Israel today. And 1,000 people begin for 15 minutes every morning with dancing. And if you want to have hope for the Jewish future and the future of the Israeli diaspora divide, and for that matter, the future of North American Jewry, come see 1,000 people dancing and to Hebrew music and engaging in conversation in English and Hebrew with Israelis and Americans, and tell me that you don't think our future is bright, because it definitely, definitely is.
Well, I look forward to doing that.
Great. Great. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. I will hold you all to that dessert that you started with at some other point when I pass through Connecticut.
Absolutely. And if I go to Ramah, I will deliver it to you. Oh, is there another question? I see a hand up.
I think that's a thumbs up.
That's a thumbs
Thumbs
up.
up.
Thumbs up. We've learned Zoom 2 years in. Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So nice. I'm going to go tuck my children into bed, but it was really nice being with all of you.
That's important. Thank
Be
you
well.
so much.
Of course. Bye-bye.
Why are you all wearing sweaters and stuff? It's 100
It's
degrees
freezing
out.
here.
Carl, it's so good to see you. You look fabulous.
Thank you.
And obviously, you're still the same wise guy.
This is the second Zoom in a row I had. I thought I was going to miss it entirely, and I had wanted to. Then Phil reminded me